Chapter 8. Swallowing, I realized there was only one thing Rainbow and I could do if Applejack was closing in fast. I need your help, Rainbow. I rapidly spat out before snagging a hook end to one of the rope lengths and pulling it out of the pile.
Huh?
She asked, drifting back over to me. Pulling out a pulley from the pile with my mouth, I ran over as best as I could to the wooden frame. The bottom locking hook fastened onto the frame easily enough as I lined it up with my mouth. It tasted terrible, but not being murdered by Applejack took precedence. As I slid the deadbolt into the lock, I pointed up to the wooden frame on the ceiling.
Oh, we're fixing it. Got it. What do you need?
She asked, throwing a mock salute to me. I can't get up there, so you're in charge of threading the rope lengths through the pulleys on the ceiling. They each have a plane and hook end, I rapidly instructed, nodding towards the pile. How did we hit this thing just right to knock the pins out? Well, I guess it's a good thing we did. Otherwise, we'd still be dangling over the elevator hole, all tangled up. Not that that was a particularly bad concept. Wait, no, bad body. Just because you discovered Fluttershy thinks of you like one of her little woodland creatures doesn't give you a right to get hormonal and switch targets. Targets already spoken for, even. Rainbow moved with a surprising level of speed and precision. She had all 4 ropes threaded by the time I slid the last pin in, and I had a head start. Pushing the frame right next to the hole with my forehead, I rotated it so it lined up. Okay, lower the hooks and I'll attach them, and then thread the other ends through the pulleys, I requested, looking up at Rainbow floating above me. She nodded and gently lowered all 8 ends down.
How do you know how to do this?
She asked curiously, watching as I threaded the ropes through the pulley systems. I don't know, I offered back, trying not to think too hard about it. With the ropes through, I gave the 4 blank ends back to her and pointed up at the ceiling frame with the hoof again, adding, put them through the second slots this time. She frowned but scooped the ends up in her forearms and flew upwards again.
Is it like a memory or something?
She asked as she reached the frame and started working. Well, she was nothing if not persistent. No, not really. It's more like a technique I didn't know I had. Probably from training before I lost my memory, I theorized. What had I been? Not a very good soldier, that much I knew. But that was good. The soldiers weren't needed here.
What's the point of these loops?
She asked, coming back down automatically with the 4 ends again. She caught on fast. Her curiosity was almost adorable. I looped them easily back through the pulleys, completing the blocks of the block and tackle system. They redirect the force of the pulling to lessen the amount needed to lift a heavier object, I summarized. Pointing back to the second outer set of pulleys, I tacked on, loop the ends through those now, and just let them dangle.
So these thingies make it easier to lift things? Huh, that's really smart,
Rainbow agreed, drawing the ropes back down. Chuckling, I shrugged weakly. Beats trying to get enough ponies together to do it pound for pound, I pointed out. We were both interrupted by the barn door opening beneath us. I swallowed lightly and hoped that this was how they had it before. Maybe they wouldn't notice? That was probably wishful thinking on my part, sadly. I reckon she's probably all right, but normally she'd have flown right out of here if and so, I heard from below. It was Applejack. My anxiety spiked. It had been the first time I'd heard that delightful accent since coming to in the clinic. Yep, a good idea to check, I heard in reply, in a lower but gentler voice. Rainbow had also said a Big Mac was coming too. Assuming that was a name, highly probable, then that was probably him. The voice was definitely masculine. Dash gave me an affirmative nod before peeking over the lip of the loft.
Hey, AJ, did you see the crash?
She asked with a surprising amount of enthusiasm. Of course, they were best friends, and she didn't need to worry about being strung up and gutted with blunt instruments. She probably wasn't nearly as panicked as I was. Oh, there you are. Are you all right, Rainbow? I heard Applejack ask, sounding concerned. Rainbow Dash nodded and smiled down at her.
Yep, it was under control. We're fine, didn't break a thing,
she assured, and I saw her swallow quietly. Oh, Dash! If she didn't notice, don't say anything. You broke something, didn't you? Wait an apple bucking minute. We? She suddenly asked, sounding more than a little suspicious. Ah, crap. Well, deciding to bite the bullet, so to speak, I shakily stood from my sitting position and joined Rainbow Dash in peeking over the side of the loft. Hey, I barely managed to greet. Applejack was looking up towards us, still wearing that dusty cowpony hat. That was the right term, right? A larger-looking fellow stood next to her and was a deep red in coat color, with a lighter orange mane. He had a massive green apple on his flank and was busy looking towards the pulley lift off to our left instead. Double crap. Oh, it's you, Applejack returned dryly, ears flattening down a little and eyes narrowing. Rainbow shook her head irritably.
Hey, he's not a bad stallion, AJ. You two just got off on a bad start,
she defended. I put my left hoof on her shoulder and shook my head, appending, what she means is, I'm sorry for my rude and improper behavior when we first met, Miss Applejack. Applejack looked surprised for a moment and dropped her gaze. Rody's already over this morning and gave me a telling. I'm sorry as well for missing your party and all, she apologized. Wait, Rarity visited her? She didn't have to do that just for me. I'd have to thank her later. Smiling, I nodded. Then, can we start over? I requested. Yeah. I'm still not totally sure about you, but Apple Bloom must have been telling it straight after all. She agreed, looking back up at me. Rainbow Dash exhaled a sigh of relief next to me and drifted off the loft in a lazy gliding spiral.
Whew. Well, at least that's over. Now I can get back to Fluttershy and...
She started to say, before trailing off as she landed. All three of us stared blankly at her for several seconds.
Hey! You never told me what was wrong earlier!
She suddenly exclaimed, glaring back up at me. Huh? My eyes widened and my blush returned as I realized she was referring to Fluttershy. I squeaked and ducked behind the lip of the loft. Again, not wanting them to see the color in my cheeks. Definitely didn't want everyone here knowing what an idiot I was. What the hell are you going on about? Applejack asked. Rainbow let out a short exhale and elaborated.
He was acting weird with Fluttershy and I earlier, and she got worried, so me, being an awesome friend and all, decided to tag along with him and figure out what was going on.
I made a sharp coughing noise. Tag along? You mean pony nap me and haul me a mile or so off the ground to interrogate me under the risk of potentially reducing me to the consistency of pancake batter, right? I corrected, slightly irate now. Rainbow Dash snorted.
It was under control. I totally could have caught you at any time. Just waited until the perfect moment to make me look the awesomest,
she defended, crossing her forelegs as I glared at her from over the loft edge again. Was that even a word? And crash us through a barn, I added. Oh. Well, that solves that mystery then, Applejack muttered tiredly, shaking her head. Big Mac shook his head and glanced back over at Applejack. There's still the matter of the lift, he added in that soft voice again. Uh-oh. In my irate rant, I had totally forgotten about that. Rainbow shifted from irritated to apprehensive in less than a second.
Oh, we accidentally hit it when we came in, but it's cool, right? Good as new?
Rainbow Dash preemptively defended, making me sigh on the inside. That could have gone much, much better. Applejack simply raised an eyebrow towards her and shook her head. You mean you landed in that there pile of ropes up in the loft? How'd you manage to damage them? She asked, tilting her head. Huh? So, they were just in a pile when we landed? Suddenly, the pins becoming dislodged made a lot more sense if they weren't actually in place to begin with.
What? But the lift was all wrapped around me and...
Rainbow muttered in a confused manner, pointing behind her to the left in the direction of our newly formed lifting device. It wasn't put together to begin with, then.
No, Rainbow, the lift ain't put together, so you can't have damaged it that badly, Applejack assured, smiling at her friend.
Big Mac made a light coughing noise and gently shook his head. You might want to take another look, sis, he pointed out, nudging his head in the direction of the lift. Applejack raised an eyebrow over at him, but nodded and walked under the loft, out of my sight. I heard a light gasp, and then a chuckle under me somewhere. Standing up, I carefully got my hooves under me again and walked over to the lift hole. Rainbow followed Applejack, apparently, and looked up at me from the bottom of the lift, smiling now as well. She looked relieved that we weren't in trouble anyway.
Well, I'll be. Lift is put together all right. Did you think you broke it and repaired it anyway, Rainbow?
She asked, smirking over at Rainbow Dash. Dash shook her head weakly, turning her head to hide a faint blush.
No. Well, okay, yeah, but I just did all the awesome physical stuff. He was the brains of the operation,
she explained, nudging her head up at me. I was a little surprised she didn't take all the credit for herself, but admittedly she was growing on me now that I saw that there was more to her than the ego and the competitiveness. Hey, I couldn't have done it without Rainbow. I just told her where to put things, I added, smiling lightly at Rainbow Dash.
Well, this is a good thing. Now we don't need to wait for Twa to get on here and do the same thing,
Applejack said, giving an experimental tug of the ropes. Big Mac agreed with a simple, yep. I watched the ropes go taut, and the wooden frame slid gently over the hole. Applejack grinned as she watched it behave as anticipated, and lowered the frame to match the level of the hole.
This'll work wonders when come apple bucking season. Gotta store 'em somewhere till they're ready to be moved out to the buyers,
she explained, before shifting her attention towards me again.
Well, you need to get down from there, I reckon. Why don't you hop on the frame and I'll lower you to the floor,
she offered. My eyes widened and I swallowed weakly. The frame was barely an inch wide at the top, with a totally hollow middle and almost a meter across. I was just now getting the hang of walking without braining myself against the ground.
Maybe that's not such a good idea, AJ. He's not the most graceful pony I've seen,
Rainbow Dash warned. Truth! That was the truth, and I was not going to disagree with it if it got me out of the grievous injury I was liable to get.
Oh, nonsense. When you stand behind your fancy mechanical work, you should have no problems riding it down, right?
She offered, with a smirk and a stubborn stare. Oh no, she was doing this intentionally. A little voice inside me warned that she was probably still a little irritated with me. If I refused, she'd probably think a lot less of me and defeat the whole point of me coming here today. If I accepted, I'd probably fall off the stupid lift and break something. Well, damn. Why couldn't this choice be easy too? Well, I was usually one for just biting the bullet, it seemed, so... Swallowing nervously, I stepped forward, careful to line my hooves up with the thin wooden boards. Once I got my front hooves on, I shimmied along the length of the board, ducking around the ropes, and carefully got my back hooves on, wobbling a little as I stood there. Applejack nodded approvingly towards me, and I caught her eyes glancing down my now spread body, an amused twinkle dancing in her eyes, and she added a wink to the mix. I blushed furiously, wobbled, and slid my back hooves along the board behind me so that they were pushed together instead. Now she was just screwing with me. Ugh. I hoped I broke my neck on the way down so this would be over. Rainbow shot me an annoyed glare after catching the exchange herself. Wonderful. Balancing was tricky enough as it was. Applejack didn't have to tease me while I was trying to focus, too.
Alrighty then. Hold her steady. You'll be down in a jiffy,
Applejack instructed, slowly letting the rope slide out from under the hoof she had pinning the main anchor to the ground. I slowly started to lower and swallowed, praying for a quick death. Nothing happened, though. No, literally nothing. I stopped about half a meter down and winced. After several seconds, I opened my eyes and looked around. I was stuck up to my chest through the loft and not descending any further. Applejack frowned and glanced up past me at the ceiling frame.
Huh. Well, that's weird. I think it's stuck, she muttered, letting more rope go and having nothing happen. Eventually, she moved her hoof off the rope entirely, and I just sat there, hanging in midair. Well, there goes the quick death option, and I'd heard starving wasn't exactly pleasant either. My mind shifted to analytical mode as I peered down at the pulleys they were attached to the frame. They rotated freely, however, and were held taut by the rope. There was no tangling, so that meant there was a friction hold near the top. It's probably the pulleys on top. One of the ropes might have had a loose fraying, or one of the pulleys isn't turning right. If Rainbow flies up there and nudges the pulleys, it would probably work again, I reasoned, perking up at the frame above me. My suspicions proved correct as I saw one of the pulleys hanging at an angle and trembling under supporting the full weight of, well, me.
Will do, boss.
Rainbow exclaimed, throwing another mock salute while smirking. She walked back out into the main area and took to the air, flying up for the frame. I tried not to snicker at her display. I hadn't meant she needed with that much gusto, but it was cute still. I didn't know you were so good with the thinking stuff, Applejack added, drawing my attention back down towards her. I smiled and shrugged as best as I could, with my front hooves a good meter apart. I'm not really sure how I know this stuff, but if it can be of use to some pony, I'd be more than happy to share, I explained, wishing I myself knew more about how I knew, if that makes any sense. Applejack gave a gentle chuckle and nodded towards me. Yeah, guess I did judge you wrong. Does talking help you with the memory thing? She asked politely.
Hey, is this bully the one doing it?
Rainbow Dash shouted down, interrupting. I glanced upwards and saw her hanging lightly onto the frame with one hoof, supporting her weight with her wings and nudging the pulley with her left front hoof. My eyes widened, and I tried shouting to her to wait. Sadly, like my usual timing, it came a few seconds later than I would have liked. Applejack's eyes bulged as she tried to slam her hoof back down on the rope, but Rainbow had already knocked the snag loose. Crack! The world became a pretty, yet numb, white and black starburst, as I felt the right side of my head and jaw collide with the loft surface as I dropped. I momentarily felt weightless, and the dirt floor felt like a fluffy pillow, as I landed in a crumpled heap, rear twisted upwards at an odd angle as it got tangled up in the wooden frame. There were faint, echoing noises around me, but I kept my eyes closed as my inner world spun, and it felt like bombs went off inside my skull. I had said a painless death, damn it! Some pony was shouting, from what I could tell, and I felt myself being pulled. Sadly, I wasn't quite sure in which direction, as I didn't know where I was facing now, or where my head was angled. Everything was numb and tingly, and it was harder and harder to think as I felt myself go lightheaded. Why couldn't I have been trained in medical magic? Surely I could at least heal myself in this body, right? The pain suddenly shot down my spine as something felt like it snapped back into place. The spinning took a jolt sideways, and then I felt like throwing up, no longer very certain of where I was. Still in the barn, was it? I kept my eyes closed, suddenly not having the energy to open them. It wasn't exactly heaven, was it? No. Maybe I'd been mistaken on what heaven was. Suddenly feeling sleepy, my thoughts drifted. A light giggling resounded through my mind. It was her. I wish things were different. My mind slipped away. Closer and closer. My mind screamed in agony as I lay broken across the pieces of stone. Heat and pain flooded through my body. I felt lines of power dancing through me, and things were hazy. A deep, dark mist hung over everything as I looked up at our shattered, burning sky. No, I was dead. I had to be dead. Most of me was missing. This
wasn't real. It couldn't be. I screamed out silently into the dusk as the sky exploded to my left. Horror struck me as I saw a massive, churning ball of fire descending from the atmosphere, igniting streaks of flames across our sky, like cracks in the glass of a window pane. It was strangely beautiful. The pure white center of the ball, mixing with the orange and blue edges, lit up the entire sky, as if a second star was descending upon the surface of the planet. It was the end. I saw it slowly inching towards the planet. My planet. My voice caught in my throat and I gave up screaming. Gave up running. What would be the point, right? What did I care? I was dead already. Fading away with everything I'd ever known seemed almost soothing at this point. The lines of energy tugged at me from what felt like my very life force. Urgency, suddenly. I had some strange sense of hurry. Did I have to be somewhere? Heaven came to mind, and I found myself chuckling at the irony. That seemed the only logical place left that I had to be. Heaven. Yes, that was familiar, but what was heaven? It was synonymous with paradise, wasn't it? Not here. Laughing, I suddenly felt sleepy again. None of this felt real. Was it a memory? The haze was so thick as I watched the light distort from the ball of burning fire. Bending away from it, the light formed a rainbow splintering across the sky. A rainbow. The raw heat beat down upon me suddenly, finally catching up. A memory of the end of everything. No, that was wrong. Was it? The rainbow was so pretty, though. The impossible ball of heat and death descended regardless of my designs. It was their planet cracker. I had seen it before. But what about that rainbow? Oh, for the love of everything that was holy and good in this place, my poor skull! Ah, son of a bitch, what'd I do for some aspirin? Groaning, I winced and slowly opened my left eye, discovering my right eye was deciding to go on strike. My view was met by deep amethyst as two gentle eyes looked back at me.
Oh, thank goodness. You're awake again. You know, I think we should start calling you Murphy.
Twilight pointedly suggested, breathing out a tense sigh before leaning back away from me again. Wait, why Murphy? The small purple lizard boy I'd met earlier asked. I saw him sitting at the end of the apparent bed I was resting in. Well, not really a bed, just a mattress. Sighing weakly, I rolled my open eye as best I could, and suddenly realized the other tried to roll with it and was a tad sore, so at least it was still there. Murphy from Murphy's Law, I'm guessing. It's an adage that states that if something can go wrong, it will. Ow, I muttered, feeling really tired still.
Pretty much. Kind of another way of saying bad luck. And we do need a name for you.
Twilight reminded, smirking. If you're joking, I must not be in that bad a condition, I groaned, nudging into the pillow more. I smelled the faint smell of books and decided I was probably back in the library. My left eye confirmed it as I looked about with it and saw that I was back in the upper loft of Twilight's library. Twilight snickered and shook her head.
The nap probably did you some good. You've only been out for a couple hours. Minor blood loss, muscle strain in your neck, and a contusion on the side of your face,
she informed in an extremely orderly manner. Well, another day, another maiming, and an almost embarrassing death. Who moved me here?
I asked weakly, rotating around and looking at Twilight straight on this time.
Applejack showed up about 3 hours ago, carrying you on her back. Big Mac was in tow, hauling the cot you're currently sleeping on in a wagon.
She answered, nudging her head towards my bed. Ugh, I felt a swell of guilt as I realized I'd been a deadweight again. Twilight must have noticed the blatantly dejected look, though, because she smiled and shook her head.
Relax. You don't owe them anything. Applejack told me she felt horrible for what happened after she explained it, and she told me to tell you not to worry about the cot. From what I saw, she definitely considers you a friend now, so you must have done wonders to improve her disposition towards you,
she reassured, sitting down on the mattress again. I nodded tiredly. Apparently Rarity helped by visiting her this morning. I just wish I didn't keep causing trouble for every pony. The medical bills must be absurd by now, I worried, shaking my head to clear it again. Twilight snickered and shook her head as well.
If that's all you're worried about, I covered it myself for the clinic visit. And Applejack patched you up this time, so that's on the house. Plus, it's not like your fault when you get injured,
she enlightened. Well, at least now I knew who I owed. Yeah, I mean, I do stupid things all the time, too. But Twilight's really nice, and I work out the medical things out of my allowance when needed, the purple lizard boy added. Thinking hard, I vaguely recalled his name was Spike, maybe? Wait a second. Hey!
Spike, you're not helping,
Twilight scolded, giving him a light glare. He held his clawed hands up in defense, shaking them back and forth. I chuckled and smiled at the display the two put on. Well, I guess I owe you then, right, Miss Twilight? I asked, focusing on her with my eye. She shook her head, holding a hoof up.
No, you don't owe me anything. It wasn't that expensive. And besides, you seem like a very nice stallion now that I've gotten to know you a little better. Friends?
She asked, smiling at me. Well, I'd like to at least help work it off a little bit, but of course I'll be your friend. You're a very nice mare, I complimented, smiling back at her as warmly as I could manage, though it must have been pretty pathetic, what with half my face wrapped in a bandage, but hey, I tried.
I'm glad. You've picked up our lingo fairly quickly, I see,
she noted, looking across the room suddenly. I saw her eyes lock onto a bookcase that appeared to be one of her private ones, and she frowned seemingly in thought. Sighing, I relaxed, having momentarily freaked out at her insinuation. I had forgotten, if only for a moment, that she knew what I actually was, or more accurately, what I wasn't, which was a native to this place. That place being either a planet or a dimension, I still hadn't decided. But all evidence is pointing more and more towards it being a dimension. Yeah, I kinda had to fit in. I guess I'm sort of a fast learner, I commented, thinking about it probably for the first time, embarrassingly enough.
Well, I bet it's easier when every pony around you is speaking the same. Still, what you did with the pulley system in the barn hinted at something more than learning quickly,
she pondered, almost as if to herself. Several books floated out of aforementioned bookcase and drifted over to her, opening as they flew. You think it has something to do with his old life in that scary place? Spike asked, frowning at Twilight's back as she read through one of the books. Being her assistant, she must have told him about me. Well, that made things a little less awkward than I was starting to feel with him still being here.
Yes, I believe he had the skill already. Machines are extremely complex, and most ponies don't specialize in them. He wouldn't have picked it up here,
she explained, flipping a few more pages. I saw complex magical diagrams and notes in the book, and what looked like celestial bodies in specific order and rotation. An engineer. I think that's what I was, I managed to say, frowning suddenly. The thought had been a reoccurring one, just bordering a subconscious level. But I was aware of it for a little while now.
An engineer?
Twilight asked,
suddenly sounding surprised and looking back at me over her shoulder. I nodded quietly, head starting to give a dull throb again. I ignored it. Yeah, I think that's what they called it in that, wherever it was. To repair things or put them together, or come up with new things to make something work. I think that was my job. I certainly wasn't a very good soldier, I remarked, a bit more cynically than desired. Twilight smiled.
Purposefully ending something's life doesn't come that naturally here. I don't know about your world, but I can definitely tell you, I fully support who you are here,
she assured. She had a warmth about her, and I felt safe again. She knew, and didn't judge me or think I was crazy. Plus, she accepted what I used to think was cowardly, instead telling me that it was a good thing. I guess it was logical that I felt safer around her. Behind these walls, even. Thank you, Miss Twilight Sparkle. I thanked as sincerely as I could manage. She shook her head, her expression becoming more timid.
You don't need to thank me. And please, just Twilight or Twy. I'm not very used to dealing with things like this,
she said, suddenly looking a lot more cute. Like this? I asked, tilting my head but smirking as I watched her fidget a little. She looked uncertain as to what to say. Spike let out a snickering sound before she had a chance to come up with something. Twilight likes books better than ponies, he interrupted, smirking at her as she glared back at him again. Well, that snapped her out of the awkwardness anyway. I looked down at the soft blanket covering me. There's nothing wrong with that, though. Sometimes a book is better company. They don't judge. They'll always be there when you need them. I muttered, suddenly feeling a wave of bitterness I couldn't entirely place. Twilight's gaze could be felt even though I wasn't looking at her. There was a soft sadness to her expression when I looked back up.
Well, friends are also like books in that regard. We'll be here for you too,
she said quietly. I looked back at her and immediately felt a pang of something missing. I've only been here 4 days, though, I muttered. Twilight chuckled and recovered her smile.
They snagged me in just a few hours, so you must be a record,
she said. It's probably because he's been unconscious for most of his stay so far, Spike added, snickering. I glared at him and shook my head. Well, I obviously don't have any plans of going back where I came from, so friends here's probably a good thing, I conceded.
I wasn't going to try to send you back. Although, I would like to go to the crater site with you tomorrow if you don't mind,
Twilight asked, looking hesitant. I raised an eyebrow at her. It's no problem. What are we going there for? I asked. She exhaled quietly, as if she was afraid I'd not want to.
Well, your memories didn't tell me where the crater was, so I need you to lead me to it. And I would like to do some readings in the area to see if there's any magical residue left. It should still have some, not even being a week yet,
she explained, flipping another page in her book and glancing over it. It has to be some pretty powerful stuff to move some pony through dimensions, though. What caused it? Spike asked inquisitively. He was a rather intelligent little fellow. Of course, for being her assistant, he probably picks up a lot. I wonder what assistant really meant here. He obviously wasn't a slave, and he had an allowance, or so he said, which also indicated not a worker. Servant, maybe? Normally they didn't get their own allowance. The closest thing she seemed to treat him as would be that of a child, really, now that I thought about it. I somehow doubted that species here could interbreed like that, so adopted, maybe? That led to questions about how old Twilight was. She looked about the same as her friends age-wise, but certainly acted a lot more mature than some of them. That was when I realized my mind was drifting again and focused back on topic.
Twilight looked up from her book, deep in thought.
Yes, very powerful. But something tells me largely accidental. I've never heard of something shifting into a different existence entirely. Are there any similarities between your world and this one?
She glanced back over to me, probably getting quite an interesting expression in return. I stared at her as if she were the crazy one, not me. No. No, not really, no. I answered easily, with no need to consider it. Twilight nodded absently, and I could almost see her sharp mind moving on to other thoughts. There was a surprising amount of calculation behind those eyes.
Not a shift, then, but a totally different spot entirely. This is unheard of before now. I can only assume it was an accident, then.
She reasoned quietly, largely talking to herself. An accident? I thought about it more and agreed that she was probably right. I was supposed to have died in that moment. Me being here instead of dead was an accident. Some random luck of the draw against 1,000,000 to 1 odds. Maybe that's why I've had nothing but misfortune since I got here? Some sort of retroactive karmic backlash? I think I'd rather be a pony than dead, I admitted, realizing that it was probably a fairly obvious conclusion. Twilight started, but then smirked back at me.
One would hope. How are you adjusting?
She asked pleasantly, closing the book and rotating to face me. Sighing, I shook my head. Your culture is so strange to me. I've tried going with my instincts, but it hasn't always been accurate. I'm not sure what's right or not, especially since a lot of things seem to be taken as common knowledge, I said, frowning as I went.
Well, you know you can ask me anything you wish. I know where you're coming from, and can probably explain things faster than you can pick them up yourself,
she reasoned, shrugging her shoulders lightly. I nodded to her and frowned a little further. Well, I might as well ask my most recent one. Is there some sort of social stigma against 2 fillies or 2 mares loving each other? I asked her, still unsure of how to handle everything surrounding Rainbow Dash and Applejack. Twilight looked surprised, but then smiled in amusement.
Rainbow Dash. No, there's no real stigma against it in either gender. A lot of more fundamentalist ponies think that it might be a waste, but other than that, it's largely just accepted as something normal. Rainbow Dash is more worried about Applejack finding out than anything else,
she explained simply, causing me to chuckle. Well, okay, so it's not that big of a secret after all, I noted out loud, amused.
I don't know if I would say that. She simply asked me for my advice about it is all. Rarity, and obviously Applejack, wouldn't know about it. Pinky is, well, she's Pinky. I have no idea if she's caught on or not, but if she has, she's not told any pony,
she elaborated, stretching her shoulders lightly. Momentarily distracted by the shifting motion of her mane, I nodded after a few seconds. She talks in her sleep. And there was the whole thing with her wings, I added, shrugging as well. Twilight's eyes widened, and a light blush formed across her features.
Oh, she must have been aroused then. Must have been one of those kinds of dreams.
She mused quietly, snickering. I kind of figured it had something to do with that. Fluttershy was vague and said it was a side effect, though, I suddenly remembered.
It's a muscle reaction is all. It's not widely documented, for obvious reasons, but it's largely assumed to just be a secondary reaction to the chemical release,
she explained. That made sense. I doubted wings were sexual organs, so it was a side effect more than anything else. Lying back down against my cot, I yawned sleepily and peeked towards her window. Modest amounts of sunlight came through, warming the room. Looked to be late in the afternoon.
Well, if you don't need anything at the moment, I'll slip back downstairs and get a bit more studying done in your case before tomorrow,
she said. I accepted her request,
deciding it was best not to tell her about the Fluttershy thing. She got off the cot and left down the stairs almost without sound, Spike slowly wandering after her. I listened to the scratching noise of his claws on the wood slowly disappearing down the stairs, and then exhaled gently. This was the first moment I had had to myself for a while now. I wondered idly what the others were doing. The familiar pang in my chest returned, and I swallowed uneasily. Surely I wasn't lonely, right? I mean, I'd been in the company of others for a few days now, almost non-stop. No, it was something more abstract than that. I stared blankly at the wall under the window, holding no expression at all. My breathing slowed, and I just let myself relax. I was safe here, that much I knew. But something was still missing. I still felt vulnerable. For some reason, I got the feeling that this was something I had felt before. I could quantify it easier that way, not that it helped any. That uneasy sense of urgency came upon me again, even though there was nothing near me that suggested a need for such. It was like I couldn't remember something that I needed to do, and it was really important. It felt like I was alone, even though I technically wasn't. A pervasive sense of loneliness slipped through me. Emptying my mind, I tried to drive out the thoughts, only absorbing the visual. The light from the sun outside glowed softly across the floor. A flicker. A tree branch moved outside of the window. The stray particles of dust drifting through the light. Particles. I felt a spasm and momentary vertigo. No, that wasn't a memory I wanted. The sunlight outside seemed to brighten, and I momentarily saw the window not as a window, but as a hole. The cracks burned through the wall, and the beam of intense light looked like hellfire descending from the sky. Gasping, I slid away from the beam, pushing myself up against the wall my bed rested against, pawing desperately with my clumsy hoofs to get away from the light. A shattering, as reality gave way to the beam and it ripped through everything. No! Their weapons weren't even something fathomable. How could something design things so horrible? I wanted to scream, but my throat felt paralyzed. I was shaking violently, slamming back against the wall, with blankets flying away now. I panicked, the light expanding from the hole, burning through everything and cracking the wall apart. They were here too? That wasn't possible. Rune after rune I formed in my mind, trying to make the old magic work. What I learned couldn't be pointless. I felt thick and heavy in the torso, starting to blister the more I tried to form a shield, a barrier, anything to protect me from that light. Noises could be heard from below me, followed by a crashing noise as I felt the air heat up. My skin felt alive with flames as I tried to violently push the energy out of myself. The blanket lifted into the air by itself, billowing as if in a hot gust of wind, and still the beam approached, twisting and laughing in my vision, as if taunting me with the inevitability of my own death. Hoof steps came up the stairs rapidly, and I heard a shout, not quite making out what they were saying. There was a sharp gasp, and then several vases worth of water splashed across me at the same time, causing me to yelp out loud. There was a noticeable sizzling sound, and my free eye widened. Steam was coming off of my skin, and the cool water made contact with my overheated flesh. Heat distortions could be seen in the air, and my coat suddenly came alive with a shivering pain, causing me to wince. It felt raw, suddenly, and I started panting for air and coughing. The window blind slammed shut suddenly, plunging the room into a cool shade. Shaking, I fell back into a weak lying position, not remembering having sat up. Twilight stared at me in shock, shaking lightly herself. Several empty vases drifted in the air around her, and a host of flowers lay at her hooves. Spike scrambled past her and started picking them up off the floor. Her breathing steadied, and her expression softened as she lowered the vases into Spike's outstretched arms. He gathered them wordlessly and rushed downstairs, avoiding eye contact with me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't really know anything. I'd felt nothing except for lost and confused, blundering from one event to the next since I woke up in that crater. I've done nothing but jump to conclusions, make ponies feel uncomfortable, and generally complicated everything I happened to stumble upon. The frustration that had been building up crashed to a head, and I just let go. There was no one left alive from my old life to make fun of it anymore. No more reservations. Curling up into a ball, I just let myself cry.